Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Secretary Ezra Taft Benson, Man, Freedom, and Government.
Today, when men in the public spotlight are asked to express their opinion on the myriad of government proposals and projects, all too often their answers seem to be based not upon any solid principle, but upon the popularity of the specific government program in question. When men must make decisions on vital political questions of the day, these decisions should be based upon and measured against certain basic principles regarding the proper role of government. The American concept is that our government was instituted of God for the benefit of man. Securing and protecting the rights, liberty, and freedoms of every individual is generally agreed to be the basic and most important single function of any government. But what are those rights? Let us first consider the origin of man's freedoms and rights. Man's rights are either God-given as part of the divine plan, or they are granted by government as part of the political plan. God or government, these are the only two possible sources. Thomas Paine stated unequivocally, rights are not gifts from one man to another, nor from one class of men to another. It is impossible to discover any origin of rights otherwise than in the origin of man. In this magnificent treatise on freedom, Frederick Bastiat pointed out life, liberty, and property do not exist because men have made laws. On the contrary, it was the fact that life, liberty, and property existed beforehand that caused men to make laws in the first place. Reason, tradition, and religious convictions all lead us to accept the divine origin of man's rights. For if we reject this and accept the premise that human rights are granted by government, then we must be willing to accept the corollary that they can be denied by government. The struggles and sacrifices of early generations enable Americans to enjoy the blessings of freedom today. This proud inheritance will have been forsaken if Americans should ever come to accept that their rights and freedoms are instituted among men by politicians and bureaucrats. The framers of our Declaration of Independence knew well the lessons of history. The noble document they drafted still stands as a monument to their wisdom, and each of us should re-examine and keep in mind the inspired words they set forth. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. It is equally important to keep in mind that the people who create a government can give to that government only such powers as they themselves have in the first place. Obviously, they cannot give that which they do not possess. So the question simply stated is, what powers properly belong to each and every person in the absence of and prior to the establishment of any organized governmental form? The answer to this question is vital to an understanding of the principles which underlie the proper functions of government. There is no doubt that each man is justified in using force if necessary to defend himself against physical harm, against theft of the fruits of his labor, and against his enslavement by another. Indeed, the early pioneers found that a great deal of their time and energy was being spent in defending themselves, their property, and their liberty. But in order for man to prosper, he cannot afford to spend his time constantly guarding his family and his property against attack and theft. So he joins together with his neighbors and hires a sheriff. At this precise moment, government is born. The individual citizens delegate to the sheriff their unquestionable right to protect themselves. The sheriff does for them only what they had a right to do for themselves, nothing more. The principle of collective right, in this instance, collective protection, its reasons for existing and its lawfulness, is clearly based on individual right. Now let us go a step further in the question of man's right to delegate power. Suppose Pioneer A has one horse. He also wants another horse, but does not have the money or other means to buy one. Pioneer B has 3 horses, and Pioneer A decides that he would like to share in his neighbor's good fortune. Is he entitled to take one of his neighbor's horses? Obviously not. If his neighbor wishes to give it or to lend it, that is another question. But so long as Pioneer B wishes to keep his property, A has no just claim to it. If A has no proper power to take B's property, he obviously cannot delegate any such power to the sheriff. Even if everyone in the community desires that B give his extra horse to A, they have no right individually or collectively to force him to do so. They cannot delegate a power they themselves do not have. This means that the proper function of government is limited to those spheres of activity within which the individual citizen has the right to act. No government can justly claim the power to seize and redistribute the people's wealth and property, or to force reluctant citizens to perform acts of charity against their will. Government is created by man, and no man possesses any such power to delegate to government. As George Washington warned, government is not reason. It is not eloquence. It is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master.